governed by a set of beliefs you may have never consciously chosen. Most of them were handed to you before you even had the ability to question them. As a child, you absorbed the world around you like a sponge, the words of your parents, the reactions of your teachers, the unspoken rules of your environment. And slowly, without realizing it, those absorbed ideas became your truth. Not the truth, your truth. And that distinction changes everything. The dangerous thing about a limiting belief is that it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't walk up to you and say, "Hello, I am the reason you are stuck." Instead, it disguises itself as logic. It sounds like common sense. It whispers things like, "People like me don't succeed at that," or "I'm just not talented enough," or asterisk, "That kind of life is for other people." Asterisk, and because it sounds so reasonable, so familiar, you never stop to challenge it. You simply accept it as reality and build your entire life around it, never testing its walls, never questioning its foundation. Tony Robbins makes it clear that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is almost never about resources. It is about resourcefulness. Two people can start in the exact same circumstances, same city, same background, same opportunities, and end up living completely different lives. The difference is not luck. The difference is the story each person believes about what is possible for them. One person sees a door. The other sees a wall. And the only thing separating those two perspectives is belief. Here is what makes this even more confronting. Your beliefs are self-fulfilling. When you believe you will fail, you subconsciously behave in ways that guarantee failure. You procrastinate. You self-sabotage. You quit just before the breakthrough. And then, when things fall apart, you look at the outcome and say, asterisk, "See? I knew it." Asterisk, the belief gets confirmed. The cycle tightens. And every repeated failure becomes another brick in the wall that keeps you from even trying again. This is not weakness. This is simply how the human mind works when left unexamined. The moment you decide to question a belief, truly question it, not just intellectually acknowledge it, something shifts. You begin to see that what felt like a permanent truth was actually just a perspective. A perspective that was formed under specific conditions, at a specific time, by a version of you that no longer exists. That belief served a purpose once. Maybe it protected you. Maybe it kept you safe. But you have outgrown it, and it is now the very thing suffocating your potential. And this is where real transformation begins. Not in a seminar, not in a book, not even in a speech. It begins in the quiet moment when you catch yourself thinking a thought that limits you, and instead of nodding along, you stop and ask, asterisk, "Is this actually true? Or is this just what I was taught to believe?" Asterisk, that pause, that single moment of awareness, is more powerful than any strategy or technique. Because once you see the cage, you can no longer pretend it isn't there. And the question that naturally follows that awareness is one that leads directly into the next truth Tony wants you to confront. That question, the one sitting at the edge of your awareness, often goes unanswered because the moment you get close to it, something stops you. A tightness in the chest. A sudden urge to change the subject in your own mind. A voice that says, asterisk, "Don't go there." Asterisk, that something has a name. And its name is fear. Not the fear of a physical threat, not the fear of actual danger, but the quiet, persistent, suffocating fear of what might happen if you truly step outside the life you have settled for. Fear is perhaps the most misunderstood force in human experience. Most people treat it as a signal to stop, as if the presence of fear is nature's way of telling you that you are heading in the wrong direction. But Tony Robbins challenges this completely. Fear, in most cases, is not a warning. It is a reaction. It is your nervous system responding to the unfamiliar, to the uncertain, to the version of life that exists beyond your current comfort zone. It is not telling you to turn back. It is simply telling you that what lies ahead is new. And new, by definition, feels dangerous to a mind that is wired for survival. Think about the things you have been afraid to do. The conversation you have been avoiding, the business you have never started, the dream you have quietly buried under the weight of practicality. Now ask yourself honestly, was the fear based on a real, tangible threat? Or was it based on a story? A projection? An imagined worst-case scenario that your mind rehearsed so many times it started to feel inevitable? In almost every case, the answer is the latter. The fear was never about what was actually in front of you. It was about what you imagined could go wrong. And you gave that imagination more power than your own potential. This is the cruel irony of fear. It feels like protection, but it is actually a prison. Every time you back down from something that frightens you, you send a message to yourself. You tell yourself, asterisk, I am not capable of handling that. Asterisk, and your mind believes you. It files that experience away as evidence that the fear was justified, that you were right to retreat, that the threat was real. Over time, the things that trigger your fear don't shrink, they grow. The comfort zone doesn't stay the same size when you stop pushing against it. It gets smaller. And the smaller it gets, the bigger everything outside of it appears. Courage, as Tony frames it, is not a personality trait that some people are born with and others are not. It is a decision. It is the moment you feel every ounce of fear and choose to move forward anyway, not because the fear disappears, but because you find something that matters more than the fear. A purpose. A vision. A reason so compelling that it outweighs the discomfort of the unknown. The people you admire most, the ones who seem fearless, are not without fear. They have simply practiced the decision to act in spite of it so many times that it has become their default response. And here is the most liberating truth about fear that Tony wants you to sit with. On the other side of every fear you have ever surrendered to, there is a version of you that never got to exist. A stronger version. A freer version. A version that knows what it feels like to face the thing and survive it. Every act of courage, no matter how small, rewires something deep inside you. It sends a new message. It builds a new kind of evidence. And slowly, the story you tell yourself about who you are begins to change. But facing fear and building courage is only part of the equation, because even the bravest person can find themselves running in circles if they never stop to examine the deeper patterns that have been quietly running their life from the very beginning. Even the person who has begun to question their beliefs, even the one who has started to push through fear, can still find themselves waking up one day wondering why nothing seems to truly change. They do the work. They read the books. They attend the seminars. They set the goals. And yet, somehow, life keeps delivering the same results, the same frustrations, the same emotional experiences, just wearing different clothes. The relationship looks different, but feels identical. The job changes, but the dissatisfaction remains. The location shifts, but the inner restlessness follows. This is not bad luck. This is not coincidence. This is the unmistakable signature of a pattern running silently beneath the surface of everything. Tony Robbins speaks with striking clarity about the role of patterns in human behavior. A pattern is not just a habit. It is a deeply grooved emotional and psychological pathway that your mind returns to automatically, especially under pressure. These patterns were not formed last year. They were formed in your earliest years, during the moments when your young mind was trying to make sense of a world it had no context for. You learned what love looks like, what safety feels like, what you have to do to be accepted, and what happens when you are not. Those early conclusions became templates. And without realizing it, you have been living inside those templates ever since, recreating familiar emotional experiences because familiarity, even when it is painful, feels safer than the unknown. The most unsettling part of this truth is that the pattern often feels completely justified in the moment. When you react with anger, it feels righteous. When you withdraw emotionally, it feels like self-protection. When you self-sabotage a good thing, it feels like realism. Like you are simply being smart enough to walk away before you get hurt. But these reactions are rarely responses to what is actually happening. They are responses to what your nervous system remembers happening. You are not reacting to the present moment. You are reacting to a ghost, a past experience that left such a deep impression that your mind now sees it everywhere, even when it isn't there. This is why so many people feel trapped despite genuinely wanting to change. It is not a lack of desire. It is not a lack of intelligence. It is the raw power of a pattern that has been reinforced thousands of times over decades of living. Every time you return to that emotional state, every time you replayed that familiar experience of feeling not enough, or feeling abandoned, or feeling out of control, the groove got deeper, the pathway got wider, and the automatic nature of the response got faster. Until one day, you are not even consciously choosing the reaction anymore. It is choosing you. Awareness, as Tony insists, is the beginning of liberation. Not the comfortable, surface-level awareness of saying, "Yes, I know I have issues," but the raw, honest, sometimes painful awareness of catching the pattern mid-motion. Of noticing the moment your body starts to tighten, your mind starts to spin its familiar story, and your old response begins to rise up like a reflex. That moment of noticing, that split second between trigger and reaction, is where your freedom lives. It is small. It is easy to miss. But it is everything. Because in that gap, for the first time, you have a choice. Breaking a pattern is not about willpower. It is not about gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to behave differently. It is about going back to the root. Understanding what the pattern was originally trying to give you, what need it was trying to meet, what wound it was trying to protect. When you understand the pattern at that level, you stop fighting it and start replacing it. You find a new, more empowering way to meet the same need. And as that new pathway gets walked again and again, the old one begins to fade. But here is what Tony wants you to understand next. Breaking patterns and facing fears will only take you so far. Because until you address the standard you have silently set for what you are willing to accept in your life, the same quality of experience will keep finding its way back to you. There is a question that most people never stop long enough to ask themselves. Not really, not honestly. And that question is this: what have I decided is acceptable in my life? Not what you wish were different. Not what you complain about to friends over dinner. But what you have actually, through your repeated choices and repeated tolerances, decided is okay. Because the life you are living right now is not an accident. It is not something that simply happened to you. It is, in large part, a direct reflection of the standards you have set, consciously or unconsciously, for what you are willing to put up with, day after day, year after year. Tony Robbins is uncompromising on this point, and it is one of the most confronting things he asks his audiences to sit with. He draws a sharp and uncomfortable distinction between what people say they want and what they actually demonstrate they want through their behavior. You can say you want a loving relationship, but if you repeatedly tolerate disrespect and call it love, your standard tells a different story. You can say you want financial freedom, but if you consistently avoid the discomfort of discipline and call it living in the moment, your standard reveals itself. Words are cheap. Standards are written in behavior. And your behavior never lies. The concept of standards goes far deeper than rules or boundaries. It is about the baseline emotional experience you have decided, somewhere deep inside, that you deserve. And this is where it gets truly confronting, because for many people, that baseline was set during the same early years when the patterns and beliefs were formed. If you grew up in an environment of chaos, chaos may feel normal to you, and calm may actually feel uncomfortable, even suspicious. If you grew up never feeling truly seen or valued, you may have unconsciously set a standard that keeps people at arm's length, because closeness feels dangerous. The standard is not always about what you consciously think you deserve. It is about what your nervous system has been conditioned to expect. What makes this even more powerful is the realization that standards are not fixed. They are not carved into you permanently. They are simply decisions, and decisions can be changed. But changing a standard requires more than wanting something different. It requires a moment of genuine disgust with the current situation. Tony speaks openly about this, the moment when something inside you shifts from, "I wish this were different," to "I absolutely refuse to continue living this way." That shift is not dramatic on the outside. But on the inside, it is seismic. It is the moment a new standard is born. Not negotiated. Not hoped for. Decided. Once a standard is truly set, not as a wish but as a non-negotiable, everything around it begins to reorganize. The decisions that once seemed difficult become obvious. The situations you once tolerated become impossible to stay in. The relationships, habits, and environments that were pulling you downward lose their grip, because they no longer match who you have decided to be. This is not about becoming rigid or cold. It is about becoming clear. Clear about what you will give your time to, what you will give your energy to, and what you will allow into the most precious and irreplaceable resource you have, your life. And perhaps the most important thing Tony wants you to understand about standards is that raising them is not a selfish act. It is, in fact, one of the most generous things you can do for yourself and for everyone around you. Because when you hold yourself to a higher standard, you stop operating from a place of quiet resentment and silent suffering. You show up differently. You give differently. You lead differently. The people in your life feel the shift, even if they cannot name it. A higher standard does not just change what you accept, it changes what you produce, what you create, and what you contribute. But even with all of this, the shattered beliefs, the conquered fears, the broken patterns, the raised standards, there remains one final truth that Tony says ties everything together. One truth that determines whether all of this work leads to a life that feels genuinely, deeply worth living. There is a myth that most people have been chasing their entire lives without ever stopping to question it. The myth goes like this: once you achieve the goal, once you reach the destination, once you finally get the thing you have been working toward, then you will be happy. Then you will feel fulfilled. Then life will feel like enough. And so people spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, postponing their sense of aliveness. Waiting for the arrival of something that, when it finally comes, delivers a satisfaction that lasts only days before the emptiness returns. Tony Robbins calls this the achievement trap, and it is one of the most widespread and quietly devastating illusions of the human experience. The truth that Tony offers in place of that myth is both simpler and more demanding. Fulfillment does not live at the finish line. It lives in the forward motion. In the daily, deliberate act of becoming someone slightly more capable, more conscious, and more alive than you were the day before. It is not the mountaintop that fills you. It is the climb. It is the moment you push past what you thought was your limit and discover there was more in you than you knew. Progress, real progress, not just movement but meaningful growth, is the closest thing to lasting happiness that any human being ever finds. And the beautiful, terrifying truth is that it is always available to you, starting right now, exactly where you are. So here is where Tony leaves you, not with a checklist, not with a strategy, but with a single, burning question to carry forward. Are you growing? Not perfectly. Not without fear or struggle or setback. but genuinely, honestly, courageously growing in your mind, in your relationships, in your sense of purpose and contribution? Because the beliefs can be rewritten, the fears can be faced, the patterns can be broken, and the standards can be raised, but none of it means anything unless you commit, every single day, to the relentless and deeply human pursuit of becoming more. That is not the end of the journey. That is the journey itself.